Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give it another minute or so to allow everybody to hop on. So thank you for joining us today. We're very excited. All right, it's 2 minutes past the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and everybody else can join in as they're coming in. My name is Amanda Hackett. I'm the communications manager for St. Benedict's Monastery in St. Joseph, Minnesota. I'm also on the board of directors for Communicators for Women Religious, and I'm also the co-chair of our education committee, and I'm going to be your facilitator today. This is a collaborative webinar between CWR and ACWR. And we had over 150 registrations, and it looks like we have over 100 people already joining us. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be part of this with us. I just want to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, this is going to be done in a webinar format. So you're going to be seeing the panelists only. It'll not be a big grid like you might be used to on other Zoom meetings. The webinar is also going to be recorded and will be distributed along with the resources used today to all registrants after the fact. And throughout the webinar, feel free to put any questions in the chat box or in the Q&A feature, and we'll be monitoring that throughout. And since this is a collaborative webinar, I just wanted to take a second to share a little bit about CWR from my end, and then I'm going to have Lisa share a little bit about ACWR. So CWR is a group of we're a professional networking group of communicators for women religious, and we've grown to include people who serve as a voice for our congregations. So it's not just people in communications roles, it also includes people in development, vocations, social justice, really anyone who serves as a voice for their congregation. And then Lisa, did you want to share a little bit about ACWR?
Sure. So thank you, Amanda. My name is Lisa Schell, and I am the congregation archivist for the Adrian Dominican Sisters in Adrian, Michigan. And I'm also serving as the current ACWR president. For those of you who don't know, ACWR is archivist. It stands for Archivists for Congregations of Women Religious. And our primary mission is to assist lay and religious archivists and archive adjacent professionals in the management, interpretation, and preservation of the historical record of Catholic sisters and nuns in the United States and worldwide. We are most excited to collaborate with CWR today and look forward to future opportunities. Archivists understand very much that collaborating with communicators is essential to increasing the visibility of our collections, and promoting legacy building, as well as creating a direct partnership to one of the congregation's most important content creators, which are communicators, because the content that they create ultimately ends up in the archive, and they are creating content that is history in the making, is what we like to call it. So in the fall, ACWR will be hosting a similar webinar in collaboration with CWR. So we'll be posting more details to come. And we would like to thank you for this wonderful opportunity, CWR, in the co-conversation at the confluence of communications archives, alongside of the critical voices represented here today of leadership sisters and lay professionals. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Lisa. As Lisa had alluded to, communicators and archivists each play different roles in what they do with the stories of women religious, but we both play a vital role to advancing the missions of our congregations. And today our panelists are going to share tips and tricks on how to best support one another as we're sharing and preserving those stories. So this is helpful whether or not you already work with your counterpart or whether you're looking how you might be able to work with your archivist or communicator better. We have Kathy Hertel-Baker and Kacie Emmerson with the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, and then Sister Sharon Casey with the Dominican Sisters of Tacoma, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a little more depth. So why don't we start with Kacie, then go to Kathy, and then Sister Sharon, you can wrap us up.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Kacie Emmerson. So I'm media specialist communicator for Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, and I've been in this role a little over a year. I started last April. So it's been a learning experience. It's been a lot of fun. But I did actually get to work with Kathy before I came here in a different role. I worked in a newspaper here in Bardstown, where Nazareth is based, for 8 years. So very familiar with the sisters from that role. And so it's been wonderful to continue that relationship in this role.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kathy Hertel-Baker. I am the new director of the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth Heritage Center. For the last 14 years, I served as congregational archivist. We're doing a transition with our visitor center, museum, and archives to create our new heritage center. And as Kacie mentioned, we've been working together here the last couple of years and had the privilege of working together on various projects, even before that through her work with the Kentucky Standard in Bardstown.
Good morning. I'm Sister Sharon Casey. Can you hear me? I am Sister Sharon Casey, a Dominican Sister of Tacoma. And I have the unique privilege of being all three. I was in leadership for over 26 years, and now I'm the archivist and communications director. We are a small community, so I will be speaking mainly from that perspective, but I look forward to hearing everyone. Thank you.
So thanks again to our great panelists. So we're going to head on to our discussion questions. And Kathy and Kacie, we'll start with you. So what are some of the ways that you share the story of your congregations? So for instance, do you use social media, your website, magazine articles, etc.? And what is your process of working together to do this?
I think I'll have Kacie kind of explain what the projects are, since she usually takes the head on those through the communications department. Then I could talk a little bit about how we collaborate on those.
So we do share our stories through social media, and it can be anywhere from a more in-depth article to just a quick photo. Sometimes that's of a newer ministry, sometimes it's from archives, but we usually end up posting to our social media pages at least twice a day. And then we also have daily updates to our website, and those will go out through email as well. So we have subscribers to receive our nightly news updates, to share stories, and we have a magazine that comes out 3 times a year. So that really allows us to put those full stories in there as well. And then in addition to that, we will occasionally reach out to local media, newspapers, and here in Bardstown or in different areas, to share different stories that might be of local interest or tie in with a particular holiday or an anniversary. So yeah.
So it looks like somebody just asked a question for Kacie about, says you send a nightly email, and I missed the rest of it. But it was a question about what was the content of the nightly emails.
Okay, so that does vary. It's usually information about a ministry that's taking place or an event that took place. So it could be a nice in-depth feature piece about what our volunteers are doing, or if it could be, as Kathy will probably touch on a little bit later, if it's Women's History Month, we'll share different history stories and stories of the past. So we'll collaborate on projects like that. So it just depends. The nightly email is just a way that we communicate what's going on in the congregation now, but then we also use it to communicate anniversaries and fun little facts and reminders of, you know, on this day 30 years ago, this is what was taking place. Here's a little update.
And so now that Casey's kind of given you an idea of all the different things that she does, including on a daily basis, kind of our workflow with her is that our staff, which currently is 2 and is soon going to be 4, we will respond to requests that Casey has for particular projects that she's working on, where we could support with information about different ministries, about particular sisters, either what's currently going on, or if we're highlighting a particular historical event. And then we will also approach her with projects that we're working on. Particularly during the pandemic, we did a lot of collaborative things on, say, the history of our hospitals, and doing posts where I would create kind of almost a mini exhibit and write up on each particular hospital, and each week we would go ahead and post that on our Facebook and on our Twitter, and then it would show up in one of the nightly emails and then be posted on our website. And we also work really closely with requests that come in from the public for information from the archives when we're not sure about, we all have privacy issues within our collections. So we work very closely then with Kacie and the communications department on requests for things like school faculty lists and staff lists, information on our orphanages, information on the people who were enslaved on our campus. We get a lot of requests for publications and interview requests. And also we get requests that may need input from our central leadership team. So we go directly to our communications department as part of our workflow to discuss those particular types of projects before we go ahead and release that kind of information to researchers. And then to follow up on that, Kacie will then get in touch with us for items that they're doing that may have historical content, so we can scan those and proof them for accuracy. If we're developing, you know, kind of new content, Kacie mentioned Women's History Month. We did a collaborative project highlighting sisters, some of our more recent sisters and some of our historic sisters through all of our media outlets. And when they're contacted by outside outlets for historical content, then also our obituaries, and then just fact checking anything that's going out that may have historical items in it.
It sounds like you guys already have a great process of working together. So thank you for sharing some of the ways that you do that so well. Before we move on to Sister Sharon with that question, Kacie, there is a question in the chat for you asking, how does your email list compare to your magazine mailing list in size?
So the email list, we have a few different audiences for our list. So we have an internal list, and that is where a lot of the nightly news goes. And so that's going to include a lot of your sisters and associates. They're going to receive that information. We will do public emails every now and then. And so that can range anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 emails that go out. I don't have the exact number on the magazine. It is several thousand that subscribe, but the magazine is free and accessible online too. So the mailing of the printed version of the magazine doesn't exactly reflect everyone who's viewing it. But we do we do mail out a lot. So I'd say email is a larger audience. And again, the magazine, it's 3 times a year. So we're still working in between sending that out on communicating with our audiences.
Great, thank you. And Sister Sharon, I guess the question will be just a little bit different for you since you're not working with another person, since you are the communicator and the archivist. But if you could just share some of the ways that you share the story of your congregation, and maybe just share how it is to balance those 2 roles since you are in charge of both.
Thanks, Amanda. First of all, we are a small community that is coming to completion. And I think this is important because it affects both communications and archive work. And in terms of communications, like Kacie and Kathy, we for years had a news magazine, which we had to discontinue last year, mainly because our sisters are getting older and our associates are getting older, and there was not that much content other than reliving the history of the congregation, which you can only do for so long or in small doses. So we agreed that we would discontinue it. We are keeping our website and our email, Facebook rather. Those 2 we are keeping. Facebook I can change more easily as things come up, reminders and things like that. The website, I've been trying to update maybe once a month because, again, lack of content and needing to find ways to share our story, because we don't want to put in the website that we're coming to completion because that scares people. They don't understand what it means if they're not part of religious life. So we don't do that. The other piece that I think is important for both communicators and archivists is we now have a commissary and 2 advisors who are from another community. And they're wonderful leaders, but they don't know the culture or the history. And so I see it as my job as both communicator and archivist to keep reminding them of different things, bringing up certain community holidays, feast days that we have celebrated in the past. And little by little, they are learning, but it still is a challenge. And so many things, even reading the history of the community doesn't really, grab you in terms of, oh, this is what the group is all about. So we are a vibrant group. We are small. We are coming to completion, but we also are trying to keep the communications aspect forefront in the community. Now, we have primarily been in the Seattle Archdiocese and in California. So my communication is primarily with the Archdiocese of Seattle, which makes it a little bit easier. And they have been very good about running some articles on the community. They do publish obituaries and things like that. So we feel that we're very connected with the Archdiocese and with the other communities in the area. It's just that our perspective is a little bit different. Thanks, Amanda.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. We do have a question in the chat, which from Donna, which actually leads into the next question I was going to ask very well, which is just going to be about best practices when you are communicating the history. So Sister Sharon, we'll start with you. I think I'm going to start with my general question I had, and then we can go more specifically to what Donna had asked. But what are some of the best practices to keep in mind when you're sharing the history of your congregation across all the different mediums? So, for example, best practices of confidentiality, respecting the past and acknowledging that times have changed. How do you do that? What are some best practices you could provide for us?
Well, with regard to the confidentiality piece, having been in all 3 roles, I know what is confidential and what cannot be used. So that one is easy for me. But in terms of the best practices that I find is trying to solicit things from the sisters, being aware of what's happening in religious life in terms of stances that LCWR is taking, and when we can align our mission statement and our corporate stances with other communities and issue a press release. What I find as my advantage is I can contextualize it. For example, when we were working on immigration, I automatically knew I had pictures and stories of years ago when we were boycotting grapes. So I could pull that out of the archives to put into the article as something that we had been doing for years. And I think as communicators and archivists continue to work together, you learn more of those little nuggets that we have. But I find that that is definitely to my advantage here. And I think the other thing that I think is a best practice for me, and I just suggested, is for the archivist to create a file of, I use the word odd things, like pictures that maybe wouldn't be used for anything else, but it's a little bit of history. And it might come in handy in Women's History Week or Catholic Sisters Week, who knows? So I try to create a file of, okay, I don't need this right now, but boy, that's sure an interesting picture. So I'm going to put it in this file to use for later. So I think that is helpful. And perhaps as archivists and communicators, you already share something like that. But if you don't, it's a really good way to sort of at your fingertips have something that you can use when you need it. The other thing I try to do in our publications, which is our website and Facebook, is to do something from the archives. We find that many of our older readers and benefactors love to see the pictures of the sisters 50 years ago and maybe some major decision that was made. So about once a month, I try to find something that's going to really relate to people from the archives and to put that in. So I think those are pretty much my best practices.
Those are great. Yeah, I know our audiences also love the older and the quirkier pictures too. So Kathy and Kacie, what would be some best practices that that you guys do with your congregation?
Do you want me to start, Kacie?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I touched on a few of these kind of broadly bit ago, but we do have a process for particular topics where we always consult with the communications team and often our central leadership team for certain types of sensitive information. One of those is faculty and staff lists, because we're never quite sure why folks want to do that. And if we don't know precisely that it's very specifically who the person is asking for, and these are for folks that are asking for them outside the congregation. I should specify that this is not, coming from, say, the development department or, a sister who is interested because she's going on a mission appeal or something like that. This is for outside requests for full faculty and staff lists. We usually have somebody from communications or development speak with the person to ascertain exactly who the person is and why they need it. 99.9% of the time, it's perfectly fine. And it's usually for a reunion or an anniversary or something where they want to honor the sisters, or they want to have it available to talk about the sisters, or they want to invite living sisters to the event. Orphanage information, because that's protected information. Fortunately, we don't hold a lot of it or pretty much anything on individuals who are in our orphanages within our records, but we do often, well, not often, but we sometimes will get the same type of request for staff information about sisters who staffed the orphanages. And again, the majority of the time, it's a former resident at one of them who just wants to know how the sister that they remember there is doing, or if they've passed. But again, we always go through another layer of permissions with that. Publications and interview requests, information on our enslaved folks, and it just slipped right out of my information on living sisters. That's a big one. We will not from the archives provide information on living sisters directly to an outside requester. That will always go through And I keep mentioning communications and development, which in our congregation are part of the same department. So we will go through that department to contact the sister that the person is requesting information on to see if they are willing to provide information, and then give them the contact information for the person requesting it. And if they would like to get in touch with that person, then they can do things that way. We also do an oral history program, and the sisters have final say on the copy that's published from the oral histories. We'll do a transcript or a write-up that we present on our website and through our social media, but the sister giving the interview has final say over what's actually put out there publicly as opposed to what goes into their file. And also, approves all of the photos, everything that goes out with those. So that's kind of how we handle a lot of that. And for photo permissions, if we don't do them directly through us, our communicators are pretty good at making sure that the credit is given to the archival center for photos that are published outside of our own social media and other publications.
That pretty much sums it up on our end. Like I said, I've been here just about a year, so I've not personally received very many requests. What I usually get is just somebody asking, if I did share a post about a school or something, they'll be like, "Oh, was Sister so and so? Is that who I'm thinking of?" And they just want to confirm that sister was the teacher that they had. And so that's just a quick yes. I think I have one time received a request to contact a sister, and of course we did just give the sister that person's contact and say, "Hey, they reached out, they want to know how you're doing. If you would like to talk to them, here's how to get a hold of them." So but it's been pretty easy and quiet on that end. So
One thing Kathy reminded me of, when we were doing our magazine, and because we only had schools, we frequently featured the schools, which included students. And so for students that we used, depending whether they were still in school or whether they had graduated, I always contacted either the parents or the person to say, "We would like to use this in our newsletter. Are you okay with that?" And that was the extent of the permission. If they did not give the permission or did not respond, we did not use the picture.
All right, thank you all for sharing those best practices. I'm going to go back to Donna's question, which I think, Kathy, you hit on pretty well already. And I don't know if Sister Sharon, if you would have something to add to it, but Donna had asked, how do you deal with permission to publish agreements, for example, with a commercial entity like a newspaper or a TV station, and doing a video with images from your archives? And she went on to say that our newish communications person recently shared some historical images without notifying the archives and without a permissions agreement. And it was just a little uncomfortable on her end because those kind of things have always been routed to the archives in the past.
Again, being a one-person show, and Tacoma is not that large, so I primarily deal with our one Tacoma paper and the Archdiocese. And because sort of, we know each other, I hate to say it, the old girls club, it's easy to get their permission from that.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything else, Kathy, that you wanted to add to that? I know you had hit on it at the end of your piece.
Building on what Sister Sharon was saying, that is something that most of the groups that are requesting are entities that we've dealt with for years, like our archdiocesan newspaper, our local newspaper, which as Kacie mentioned, she worked for 8 years beforehand. So we have some good relationships there. And then because both departments usually work very close together on anything, like any major interviews or publications, this was a little before Casey's time, but we worked with a reporter from the New York Times on a story on our enslaved people. And that actually, most of the communications with that particular author everything went through both our communicator, myself, and then also we brought in a liaison from our central leadership team from that also to make sure that our message was always consistent and concise. And then we'll get like and then for books, I just saw one come up there about you don't get agreements in writing for things like books. We definitely do for more ephemeral things like social media sites. We ask for credit, but we don't necessarily do a formal agreement for them, if that does. I hope Donna, hi Donna, I know Donna from ACWR. I hope that answers the question.
All right. And then moving on. So I want Kathy to share one thing that Kacie can do to support you in your role. And then I want Kacie to do the same thing with Kathy. And then with Sister Sharon, it'll be sharing how a communicator can help the archivist in their role, how the archivist can help the communicator in their role, or something you can do to support one another. So Kacie and Kathy, if you two want to go first.
Okay. Well, and these are things that Kacie very much already does. That is to keep us in the loop for projects, particularly plans for projects in the future. Even if you don't think that they might involve the archives or historical materials, to let us know what those upcoming projects are so that we can be prepared. One, if there ends up being, a big request for materials or something like, say, Women's History Month, letting us know in as far in advance as possible that materials are going to be needed and what materials will be needed, so that we have the time to get everything together and make sure it's accurate and in the format that's needed. And that's the biggest thing, is keeping us informed of what's going on, what they think they're going to need, and asking us if there's anything we might be able to contribute, even if they don't think it's necessarily an historic type of project.
Kathy is great at working with me to get what I need, even when I don't give her the greatest amount of heads up on something. I try. One thing that she can do to support me as a communicator is definitely just helping me access what I need. And as we continue to look at ways to grow and expand that relationship together and what we can do, I would love to be able to increase maybe some of the digital access to photographs, and like it was suggested before, kind of, having that album of odd photos to use. That would be great to access for social media posts or anything. So yeah, just being able to continue working together and getting the resources that we need and brainstorming ideas on creative ways to use those resources.
And I would just agree with that. I think it's the relationship and keeping in good communication, so that sometimes you can be ahead of something, other times you need something tomorrow. One thing I would mention where I think communications, archivists, and leadership need to work together is when there is a sexual allegation brought or any other kind of serious allegation, because each of them have certain material that may or may not be shared, and determining, as putting the front on it. Who's going to be the spokesperson? So you don't want to have your communications person broadsided with information that the press is going to ask that you didn't know about. So I think that's one area, and maybe any other sensitive areas where leadership, communicators, and archivists really need to work together.
Yes, that is a great point, Sister Sharon. I want to encourage everyone at this time, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box or the Q&A feature. We have a lot of time for questions. I also just want to address what Sister Joanne Gallagher has put in the chat, and wondered if Kathy or Sister Sharon, if you have had any similar experiences with this. I think this is more of an archivist side of things, but Sister Joanne had said that a significant issue that they've been facing is some of the better pictures that they've had in the archives that were not taken by them are no longer owned by, for example, the Toronto paper that took an image that they really like to use no longer owns it, and now Getty Images owns it, and they have to pay hundreds of dollars just to use that. So I'm wondering if that is something that's come up in your congregations, or if you have any advice or anything to add to that.
I have not read. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we haven't had a situation like that where we were trying to use a photo, but we have had folks want to use photos that we have copies of that are owned by other entities. Usually it's a newspaper that took the photos for us. And what we do is we have a form that basically says that we'll give them a copy of the photo, but if they plan to use it if they plan to publish it in any way, it is their responsibility to contact the copyright holder and gain permission, and that we do not have the ability to grant them permission to use that photo, and that they understand that, so that if they decide to publish it without getting permission from the actual copyright holder, it can't come back to us. We can say they knew we couldn't give them permission. They knew they had to get it from the copyright holder.
And I really have not run into that problem. But talking about pictures, I also have a background in journalism and came into the archivist because we didn't have anybody else. Is the responsibility of both to really look at the pictures that you're going to publish on your website or whatever. I always use the example, we had a wonderful picture of our sisters with our associates. And unfortunately, one sister had her legs spread apart and she was in the front row. I mean, I just destroyed the picture. I mean, I think that there are certain guidelines for looking at the pictures that we're going to use. And the recommendation that I've had from other archivists is if they can never be used, just throw them out unless they are of some historical significance. But other than that, no, I have not run into the problem with the copyrights, at least not yet. So.
All right, thank you for sharing. Jan asked a question for Sister Sharon in the chat. She asks, are your archives still physically with you on site, or have they gone to one of the locations that is providing rehoming of archives for communities coming to completion? I'm wondering how this process will change in the coming years as far as accessing things quickly.
That's a great question. Yes, our archives are still physically at our place. They will be probably for another 1.5 to 2 years until I finish getting them ready to move. And we have made the arrangement with the University of Santa Clara that being on the West Coast, we will have our archives going there. They have put together a women in religious life and theology collection. And so our archives will go there, as the Sisters of the Holy Family are already there. I stay in contact with Nadia regularly just to be sure I'm on the right track for what Santa Clara wants. And that has been working really well. And I forget the second part. I'm sorry. Was there a second part to that question?
She just said she was wondering how this process would change in the coming years as far as being able to access things quickly.
The access. Thank you. As I understand it, and this is in the very early stages of planning, there is a group working, and maybe Lisa could even speak to that, but I think there is a group that is hoping to get a grant that they will be able to create a database that would link all of these archives in various places. So if a researcher were looking, say, for Tacoma Dominicans, they not only would look at the West Coast at Santa Clara, but they could look at Boston College or Cleveland or whatever. That is a hope, and I really hope that it does come to fruition, because I think that will make a great difference in the future for researchers.
And thank you. I actually had a question that just came up for me. So do your congregations, do your sisters have written permission, or have they given permission to be photographed and have those photographs used?
Pretty much ours have. Again, we're small. And so there's sort of, a blanket. I'm like, anytime pictures are taken, they may be published, and nobody has said, oh no, I don't want mine in print. But they trust.
We don't have a.
I was just going to say, but they trust me that, as I said earlier, I will look at the photograph to make sure it is appropriate and that it is good photograph for them to go out. If they're yawning or something, I will not use those.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, we don't have a formal process of getting permission. We work under the, everything is congregational, congregational property. However, especially with living sisters, we'll generally ask or let them know if we're using a photo of them in something, just in case they're not particularly comfortable with it. We do, like Sister Sharon was saying, we'll look at the photos very closely. We're not going to purposely publish anything that's unflattering. And usually if we have any question at all, we will, even with, sisters who are no longer with us, who can't give us, their opinion on it, we'll ask another sister. And it's like, we were thinking of doing this particular picture or even this particular story. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that's going to be well received? Or is that something that, maybe we think is interesting, but we didn't realize that the sisters found it somewhat controversial, or for some reason don't like to talk about it or don't want that out there for folks outside the community to see. So yeah, we do a lot of that.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up, because the reason I asked the question is we had all our sisters sign these forms years ago now, and just kind of wondering how to handle as our sisters are aging, and they at one point were able to give full permission with a full mentality, and may not be able to do that anymore. So I was just kind of curious how you might be handling that, or if you look at it more as they've given permission, so that's what they've done. But we also are very careful with what we do, and we won't publish anything that's unflattering or that the public doesn't need to see.
One thing I do is sometimes we have a great picture we want to use, and it has one or two former members in it. And if they are living, I will contact them and say, hey, this is a great picture. Remember when? And I'd like to use it. And most of the time they, are very open to having that done. If they are deceased, it's a little more tricky. And my standard is just, it depends on what the topic is. If it's a very general topic that's not going to be controversial, I'll use the picture. If it could maybe I knew something, had heard something about that sister when she was at that school that was not necessarily positive, I won't use it.
Jack asked, do you have any other tips for getting great photos of sisters to share? Our congregation would like more photos of sisters in ministry that help tell the story of their work.
Good luck.
Yeah, it can be difficult to get those.
Yeah.
Photograph everything. Just keep shooting. That's so I'm the campus photographer as well, and I collaborate with our communicators in India to send us photos of ministries and missions over there. And in Louisville, we'll get a lot of submitted photos. But on campus, you know, when we have gatherings and things like that, I've always got a camera with me. So just watch for those good expressive moments, those good interaction moments. And even if they're not really necessarily doing anything that you think is story worthy in that moment, just that great photo of a conversation between two people can accompany a story later on. And so yeah, just shoot as much as you can.
Elizabeth asks, how often does everyone's communication departments transfer their material to the archives? Do you have any wisdom to share there?
I mean,
Go
Kathy,
ahead, Casey.
you pretty much have access to anything
Yeah,
that I'm gonna be
we're
posting.
fortunate that pretty much we have that access to everything that's getting posted by communications. So we save both, you know, the emails electronically that get sent out every night that have all of the posts. And then we go ahead and print those out and make hard copies of them, because one, I just always have this great fear of, you know, Armageddon, and like we lose all of the, and we don't have a very robust digital records management program here at the moment. And also when the sisters want to go through them, they don't want to go through looking at the digital files. They want to page through it. And we find it very helpful to just kind of have the things that are, you know, before and after it too, that often is we store them then in chronological order, and then we index all of them. We have them all indexed. So that's kind of how we do it here. And then if we just need, if we're the ones who are saying, hey, do you have any recent photos of this? We don't have unlimited access to the digital files for the communications department, but they will send us appropriate links for getting into their digital photo files to kind of look through and search for what we might need, particularly for when we're doing our oral history projects, where we're using both older photos of sisters and then current photos of sisters.
And I just automatically archive what I write.
So for outside publications, I do keep a running spreadsheet. So every week I kind of have the Google alerts that I check for anytime the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth are mentioned in a news type publication, whether it's Global Sisters Report or The Record or the Herald Leader or a little newspaper in Maryland that picks something up. And so I do have those links saved in that spreadsheet that Kathy has access to as well. So if it is something that might be significant, something to save, she can go back and look at those and print them, or try and get a hard copy if needed.
And that's what we usually do, is I have those alerts too, just in case, but we go through and make hard copies of those to have, and then those will go in either individual mission files, sisters drop files, wherever it's appropriate to go ahead and file those.
Thank you for sharing those processes. I do just want, as a CWR member, I'm going to do a shameless plug. Lori, who is one of the co-chairs for our annual conference this fall, did mention that there is going to be a workshop at our conference this year about managing digital assets. It's from October 10th to 13th in St. Louis. So just shameless plug there. You can get 1-day passes if you're in the area and interested in popping in on this workshop. Then I'm just reading the chat real quick. We had something come in from Diane. And hers was more of a comment adding to it than a question. I will say I know I'm not a panelist, but for our congregation, as the photos come in, I organize them just by month. And then at the end of every month, I try to put it on a disc, and then I give that disc to the archives and they do what they need to do with that. So that's how we handle it. And that's just how we've done it since I started. So I'd be very curious to hear from other congregations as well, how they handle that, because that can get very backlogged sometimes. Not seeing any more questions in the chat right now. We do still have a few minutes. Is there anything else that the three of you can think of that you'd like to add or talk about regarding this topic?
I would simply say keep talking to one another. And many times, many things that you weren't even thinking of come up that it's like, oh, I can use that, or oh, that would be, we don't have that in the archives yet. So
That's similar to what I was going to say. I had a couple things jotted down. One was, for the archivists, seek out, meet, and become friends with your communicators. If you don't already know who they are, or if you're new to the job, figure out who they are, introduce yourself, and make sure they know your face and they know what you can do to help them, because a lot of times it's just not something you think about. You've got so much communicators are trying to do every day. The last thing they're thinking about is, wow, I wonder if how the archives can help that. To just try and bring each other into the loop as soon as possible when you've got a project. If you think there's any chance you might need each other's help on something, just so, when you do figure out that you do need help, it's not completely out of left field. And then if it's possible, if your organization works this way, try and have even regular meetings, even thoroughly quarterly or something, where you just talk about things that you even just, stuff you haven't even started on, but you think you might want to do. Again, so that, these things are kind of in everybody's brain. And it might turn out that that's just the thing that, either your communicator, your archivist needed to hear because they had a similar project they were thinking of. And now, they know that somebody else is on board and you can move forward with it.
Yes, I know we both get very excited when we talk about our little ideas on how to share some fun stories and information in new ways. And so that's another thing I would suggest is just look beyond what you're doing now, and how you share stories, and discuss together what new ways you can share stories about your congregation. I know we've talked about we've got a podcast now, but it's very small, so maybe looking in the future to expand that, and incorporate archives and also some newer mission and ministry stories through a podcast. We've talked about potentially looking at the possibility of doing a walking history tour on our campus. We've got a lot of interest generated in the local community with some events we've held recently about people wanting to learn more. We have great walking paths here, so kind of utilizing the campus and archives and communications in that way, bringing it together to share that history in a way that isn't being done currently.
Great ideas. I do want to hit on Charlene's question super quick. That was in the chat. The panelists have all agreed to share their contact information, and that will all be sent to you after the fact in an email with other resources from this. So yes, you can reach out to them. And I think we have time for just one more quick question. Edith had asked, what guidelines are given to sisters so that they know what sort of things the archives do and do not want? So it sounds like that's more of a question for Kathy and for Sister Sharon.
I'm still in the process of developing specific guidelines. I know some are out there because I've borrowed them from other communities. But one of the things I've been really clear that we don't need is everybody's devotional statues and holy cards and memorabilia of that sort. I try to be sensitive because for some of the people, this is very dear to them. So I just always take it and say, I will see what I can do. And if not, we'll find a good home for it. But trying to really get rid of some of the things that we've had in the archives that don't belong there. I have put out a plea with a few guidelines, like, you know, if you have pictures from where you were teaching, or we had a postulate in Ireland, you know, if any of you have pictures from those days, please send them. And it's amazing what I'm getting, what people have been hiding in their suitcase or wherever, and they've been generous about bringing that forward. So it's a work in progress.
And we do quarterly presentations to the sisters about the history here, and then we'll talk to them. You know, we like to throw in a little bit about, you know, be sure to save your materials, especially about, you know, your work. But we do the same sort of thing in that if we get things that aren't necessarily what we want for the collection, we will just take it and then work from there as to how to find homes for the materials. And we also started working with our housekeeping department, because they were the ones who would go into sisters' rooms after they either moved to our nursing facility or after they passed, to pack up what was in the rooms. And a lot of times they were the ones kind of making decisions as to what came to us and what got thrown out. And so now, after talking with them, they know that if there's any doubt at all as to whether or not it needs to come to us, send everything to us. We'll weed through it and figure out what we need to keep and what we don't, so that we don't end up getting all of the newspaper clippings and none of the diaries and photographs, which is the type of thing that would happen. We'd not get any of the photo albums. Now, and obviously the way it works here is the family, if there is family, gets first.
Yes.
You know, first choice. It sounds weird to say it that way, but the family always, you know, is able to go through and take anything that they want. But we've had lots of, not lots, but many occasions where the family has been like, well, we love these, but we think that, you know, it might be important to the archives too. And we'll talk to them about, like, we'll take the original scrapbook, we'll make a scan of it for them and, you know, give them the copy to have, or vice versa, depending on, you know, how they feel about the physical item, to make sure that, you know, we're getting those things. But we don't have a formal thing that we send out to sisters saying, please save these things. But we try and talk about it as much as possible with them, because they'll come over and go, I want to see my file. What's in there? What do you want me to send? And so we'll show them kind of one of those, you know, sisters files that kind of has like all the things that we could ever hope. Like, this is what we would love to have, you know, but anything you think you want us to save about you, send it to us and we'll put it in there. And then if we need to weed later, we'll do that.
I do the same thing when a sister passes. Family get first choice of what things that they would need. And many times they want a lot, other times they want very little.
Well, thank you. We are at the top of the hour, and unfortunately, I do see another question or two have rolled in. So I'm going to encourage everybody to reach out to our panelists if you have further questions or want to go into further discussion. Thank you so much to Kacie, Kathy, and Sister Sharon for sharing your wisdom and sharing how you collaborate with one another. Just a reminder again that there will be an email to all registrants after this webinar is through with resources, email addresses, and there will also be a survey coming too. So we'd really appreciate if you could fill that out. And as Lisa had teased in the beginning, there will be another collaborative webinar between our two groups sometime in the fall. So please stay tuned and we'll share information with that as we get it going together. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.